I'm beating the game. I don't want the game to beat me. I took advantage of it. You know what I mean? And that's how it should be. You know, you don't want to get, because at the end of the day, you're going to get screwed no matter what.
Nobody wants to be Michael Jordan on the Wizards.
They tell me, they will tell you, pass the torch. Fuck that. Not passing the torch. I'm leaving with the freaking torch, you know? Right. I'm leaving with the title. If the young guys listen to me, that's how it should be done. Don't pass the torch. Retire on your own when you're on top of your craft.
A common theme in MMA has been when a new fighter comes up, they fight the older fighters, they beat them, and then once they get older, they have to repay the favor and fight the younger guys because the older guys gave them a chance and it's an opportunity for them to pass the torch. So we've seen this for a very long time now and it's worked well for the UFC, but I do feel like the UFC shouldn't always be giving older fighters these new hungry prospects to kind of make a name off them and kind of get rid of these older fighters and almost force them into retirement by constantly giving them opponents that are meant to beat them. So in today's video, I want to talk about 3 reasons why I think the UFC shouldn't always use the older fighter to make a name off the younger fighters and how this can benefit everybody involved. Firstly, the first reason why I think the UFC shouldn't always come back to this method, and by the way, I think that this is still a very viable method to test somebody because there are some veterans like guys like Kamaru Usman who still got some gas in the tank and can still beat some of these younger guys. But again, I don't think it should always be happening. But regardless, the first reason why I think the UFC shouldn't always try to feed their older fighters to young, hungry fighters is because typically we don't learn from these fights. A lot of the times it's just, well, this guy's just going out there to get squashed and get beat down. I really feel this way, especially with the fight last weekend. Like, I don't know how good Mike Malott really is. I don't know if he's championship caliber. I don't know if he's going to be a top 5 fighter. I don't even know if he's going to be a top 10 fighter. I feel like I didn't really learn anything, but a fight that would have probably like taught us a lot more about Mike Malott would have been a fight against Joaquin Buckley, which I think would have made sense. You know, Buckley was coming off a loss. He's ranked number 9. Gilbert Burns was like ranked number 12 or 13, so it's like a slight step up in competition. But Mike Malott has just beaten Kevin Holland, who was recently ranked and had a very close fight against D-Rod, who's also in the rankings. And actually Kevin Holland beat Joaquin Buckley, so I feel like that would have been a pretty interesting matchup, and we would have learned from both guys how well can Buckley come back from a loss in this weight class, and how well does Mike Malott do against someone who's in their prime and who is a serious threat to him, not somebody who is 0-4 like Gilbert Burns. And the real problem with this is that sometimes guys get wins and they get up the rankings by fighting these older fighters that they're meant to beat. But if they do manage to get the belt, like sometimes it doesn't end up too well for them. Like for example, Leon Edwards, on his way to the title, he fought guys like Donald Cowboy Cerrone, Gunnar Nelson, RDA, Nate Diaz, like guys who were like a little bit older and past their prime and not at their best. Leon was able to beat these guys and he got the title off of Kamaru Usman and he beat him in the rematch. Then he beat an older, tentative Colby. But then after that, he won on a 3-fight losing streak while like losing the title to Bilal and then getting finished by Sean Brady and getting knocked out by Carlos Pratis in the most devastating fashion that has ever happened in his career. And part of that is because I feel like in his title run, I feel like Leon Edwards didn't quite fight like the best guys out there, like the best welterweights. Like if he would have had like a fight with Wonderboy, which he could have had, and a fight with Woodley, which got canceled, I feel like those would have probably helped him out a little bit more and not like get him those devastating losses. And another example is a guy like JDM. He goes from fighting Kevin Holland, then he's ranked like number 11 or 12, and he fights Gilbert Burns, and Gilbert Burns is able to have some success against him, but ultimately JDM does win the fight, and JDM gets the belt. But then after that, he fights Islam Makhachev, and it's a complete domination from Islam Makhachev, a 50-45 dominance. And part of that is because Islam Makhachev is obviously the best fighter in the world, but also part of that could be because JDM might have not had those tests that would have prepared him for a challenge as big as Islam Makhachev, because he went from beating Gilbert Burns, a guy who was a little bit older and coming off of shoulder surgery, to fighting Bilal, which was a good matchup for him. And then right away he fights like one of the best in the world. And that gap, like could have been close if he again would have gone through some of these other top hungry guys that were in their primes and could have really like elevated his game. Another example is Jamal Hill, right? He goes from beating Thiago Santos, who's a little bit older and had like blown out knees, and he beats him, and then he beats Glover Teixeira, who again was on the older side, but then he fights guys in their primes like Alex Pereira and Khalil Roundtree and Yair Prohaska, and he loses all of those fights, and he actually gets knocked out in 2 of those fights. So again, by like skipping the, like maybe not skipping the line, but by the UFC giving them like older guys who are like on their way out the door, that's not really doing them too many favors. It's actually creating a lack of like I feel like a sort of like deception in their skills. Like we don't truly know how good they are. Like yes, they're on winning streaks, and yes, they are winning, but we don't quite know how good they are because they're not fighting the best guys. They're fighting these guys that they're meant to beat, and then once you get the title, you don't really see the same level of dominance. But moving on to another point I want to make, and that is that you can still generate money from these older fighters. So once a fighter starts losing fights and they, you know, maybe like they go from being a champion to no longer being a champion, like the UFC immediately goes into, okay, let's try to use younger fighters to make a name off that person. But no, sometimes that isn't always the best option. Of course, that should still be a strategy employed by the UFC, but they should still look at it from like a perspective of your car potentially like breaking down. Like you see something wrong with your car and you think, oh, you know, this is trash, like I gotta get a new car. Like no, sometimes you just need to take it to the mechanic shop and get it fixed up, and then you'll see that it still works for you and it can still like get you from point A to point B. And one example I have for the UFC is, instead of booking a fight like Belal Muhammad versus Gabriel Bonfim, why not do Belal Muhammad versus Kamaru Usman? Both guys are older, both guys are former champions, and they just so happen to hate each other's guts. There's even a podcast that's missing from the internet where they apparently had a full-on fist fight. Henry Cejudo had to break it up. He apparently nearly got his head kicked off because those guys were like straight up brawling out there. And the UFC can coerce Kamaru Usman and Cejudo to release that podcast to build even more hype for that fight. And I feel like it would be a great fight. Like honestly, they can have a press conference. Like if it's a main event of a fight night, like have a press conference for that card, or you can put it as a co-main event, 5-round co-main event to a pay-per-view. That'd be great. Again, you have both guys on stage talking trash, selling the fight, and making you guys a lot more money. Also, a guy like Conor McGregor can generate a lot of money for the UFC, but for some reason they offered him a fight against Carlos Prates, a guy who is young and hungry and in his prime, and it doesn't really make sense because Conor's not ranked. It's not like Prates would have something massive to gain from beating Conor. Obviously, there's the money that comes with it, there's a popularity, but why wouldn't you try to use Conor to make more money by having him win a fight, by having him take on a guy like Michael Chandler or maybe a Max Holloway, where it's like a bit more competitive and you have some real like potential of Conor McGregor actually winning those fights, instead of a guy who's much bigger than him, who's active, who's very dangerous and could hurt Conor McGregor badly. Like instead of trying to do that and ruin McGregor's career, let's like try and make the most out of Conor McGregor, because at the end of the day,
it's all about the money. It's all about the money.
And you can have guys like Gilbert Burns headline cards in Brazil, so you can go to Brazil a lot more often. You can have Jan Blachowicz fight guys like Volkan Oezdemir in Europe, maybe in Poland or maybe in Switzerland. It depends. Like I feel like you can go to these different places, but another thing that the UFC's got to remember is that the fans still love these guys. Like we still want to see these guys win. We don't want to see Gilbert Burns lose fights. Yes, it is the best versus the best, but if you're not going to do that with the championship fights, then why should guys like Gilbert Burns have to fight the best fighters if the champions aren't even doing that themselves? But the last point I want to make is that you can actually build even more stars if you have guys actually fighting the best competition a lot more often, compared to having younger fighters only fight older fighters that they're meant to be. You can build more stars by having, the best guys, like the best young guys fighting each other. Like, for example, Islam Makhachev, like, was Arman Tsarukyan's first UFC opponent, and although Arman lost that fight, when Islam started becoming like the champion and he was making noise and becoming the pound for pound king, everyone was thinking about Arman and were thinking, hold on, this guy was actually one of the only guys that gave Islam Makhachev a tough fight. Let me tune in to see Arman Tsarukyan because he could be a problem because of how well he did against Islam Makhachev. So now I remember him. I have an idea of who he is simply because of that fight. And also, sometimes you don't always need to like rush these like younger fighters into like big spots, because a lot of times we see the number 11 guy takes on the number 3 guy, and then it doesn't really, like, yes, like the number 11 guy might win, but then they get into the title fight and they're really not that good. Like Paddy Pimblett, for example, he was fighting guys on losing streaks like Tony Ferguson, who at the time I believe was on a 6 or 5 fight losing streak, clearly past his prime. Essentially did nothing for Paddy. Then Paddy took on Bobby Green, who was on a, I believe, 2 fight losing streak, or maybe a 1. No. I think he was on a losing streak. Then he beat Jim Miller, and then he lost to Paddy. But that didn't really do too much for Paddy. And then Paddy fights Justin Gaethje, a guy who is closer to his prime, a little bit past it, but still a top guy. And you can see that Paddy is missing some skills that essentially cost him the victory, like getting the fight to the ground and defending himself, really. And the problem is, like, when you rush them to the top like that, like, they have no other option but to fight other top fighters, especially like Sean O'Malley, for example. His last knockout was in 2023, and I feel like he could have had a lot more, and I think the UFC kind of rushed him a little bit. They had something good going for him. He took on Pedro Munoz. It was a no contest, and then right away they put him in there against Peter Yan, and fair enough, he got the win by split decision, which I felt he lost. Then he goes out there and he clips out Jermaine Sterling, but then he loses the title to Merab, like a real contender. Like, Chito wasn't a real contender. He didn't deserve that fight. But yeah, he loses to Merab twice in a row. Kind of kills some hype for Sean O'Malley, and now we see that he still hasn't been like able to like really put someone to sleep in like 3 years at this point. On the other hand, you have fighters like Nasruddin Imavov and Ian Gary, who are becoming like organic stars of their own by simply fighting the best guys that aren't just like older fighters that are past their primes. No, they're fighting peak fighters. Like Ian Gary's taking on Shafkai, Carlos Prates, MVP, Bilal. Like, he's fighting the best guys that he can. Same with Imavov. He's fighting Jared Cannonier. He's fighting Brendan Allen. He's fighting Adesanya. He's fighting Caio Beraldo. Like, he's fighting the best guys that he can. Another guy I want to look at is Benoit Saint-Denis. Like, they try to rush him from like beating Mike Frivola to fighting Dustin Poirier, and then he gets knocked out. Then he gets destroyed by Renato Moicano. And then you can see that the UFC is building him up slowly. Yes, he's still fighting like contenders that are like still in their prime, still like kind of near his skill range, like guys like Mauricio Rufy, who is in his prime, guys like Dan Hooker, who might be a bit past his prime, and Beneil Dariush. But like, he's gradually getting up the ladder. He's not getting rushed to the top because he has a big name. No, he's like slowly getting better, and in turn he's also becoming a star as he's doing it. And it was the same thing with Merab Dvalishvili. Really, like, the guy was kind of like hated by guys, like no one really cared about him, but he was like fighting the best guys that he could. Like, he was fighting Peter Yan before getting the title. He was fighting Jose Aldo. He was fighting Henry Cejudo. He was fighting a whole bunch of top guys, even though he wasn't getting the title shot. But when he got the title, he was ready and he was putting on exciting performances. And I think that's how it should be. And he became a star in his own right. So ultimately, I think the UFC should balance out their matchmaking a lot more. They shouldn't really always use this strategy of using the older fighters to make a name for the younger fighters. I think they should balance it out and everybody can be happy. The older fighters can still have their opportunities to win and, you know, make that money, while also not really having to go through these wars and dangerous matchups against these guys that can put a lot of damage on them. But also, you know, I don't think it should be completely taken away. I think that it still has value. So like seeing the old veterans versus the young guys. But I think there's a lot of value in younger fighters taking on younger fighters as well. And who knows, with this balanced approach, maybe more fighters might be more inclined to stick around a little bit longer and have slightly longer careers in the UFC. Because every time you hear them talk about how, I'm not motivated to fight these young hungry guys, like I don't want to do it. Like Dustin Poirier talked about it, Daniel Cormier talked about it. And if they can give fighters like Michael Chiesa like a lovely retirement fight, then why can't they do it against a guy like Gilbert Burns? And he was talking about retirement even before this fight. Like, there was rumors that he was going to retire after the Sean Brady fight. And the UFC should have known that this was on the horizon. So him versus Colby Covington would have been a nice way to end Gilbert's career, especially if he was able to get that win. But it is what it is. Gilbert retired. Either way, I think that this would be a good way for the UFC to start making even more stars. But let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you guys for watching. God bless. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.